The train lurched to a stop at the San Andreas depot, and Amelia Bradshaw pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone in the dusty California town could hear it. She had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, and now that stranger was somewhere on that platform, waiting to claim his mail-order bride like a package from the Sears catalog. It was April 1882, and Amelia had left behind everything she knew in Boston after her father's gambling debts had consumed their modest home, and her mother had died from consumption the previous winter. The advertisement had seemed like providence when she found it tucked between the pages of a newspaper her employer had discarded. Respectable rancher seeks educated woman for marriage. Must be of good character and willing to make a home in California. She had written back that very night, her hands trembling as she composed lies about how much she wanted adventure, when really all she wanted was safety. The conductor helped her down the steps, and Amelia stood on the platform clutching her worn carpetbag, scanning the faces of the men gathered there. Her eyes landed on a tall figure leaning against a post, his hat pulled low over his face. He straightened when he saw her, and she caught her first glimpse of Yates Quinlan. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 26 or 27 to her 22 years. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with a strong jaw and eyes that were startlingly blue beneath the brim of his hat. He wore dusty trousers, scuffed boots, and a shirt that had seen better days, but there was something solid about him, something that made her breath catch despite her fear. "Miss Bradshaw." His voice was deep and careful, like he was unused to speaking to women. "Yes, Mr. Quinlan, I presume." He nodded and reached for her bag. "We can get married tomorrow if that suits you. Reverend Michaels is expecting us. Tonight you can stay at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. It would not be proper otherwise." Amelia felt relief wash through her. At least he had some sense of propriety. That would be acceptable. The boarding house was a simple 2-story structure on the edge of San Andreas, which was really little more than a collection of buildings clustered around a main street. Mrs. Henderson was a plump woman with kind eyes who showed Amelia to a small room with a brass bed and a washstand. "Yates is a good man," she said as she set down a pitcher of water. "Keeps to himself mostly since his parents passed. That ranch has been in his family since they came out here in '51 during the gold rush, though they made their money in cattle, not gold. You could do worse, dear." After Mrs. Henderson left, Amelia sat on the bed and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Boston. She cried for her mother, for her childhood home, for the life she had imagined before everything fell apart. Then she washed her face, unpacked her few belongings, and steeled herself for what came next. The wedding the next afternoon was brief and businesslike. Yates had cleaned up, wearing what was clearly his best suit, though it was a bit tight across the shoulders. He spoke his vows in that same careful voice, and Amelia repeated hers, feeling like she was play-acting in some strange theater production. He slipped a simple gold band on her finger, and the Reverend pronounced them man and wife. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Michaels said with a smile. Yates looked uncertain, then leaned down and pressed a quick, dry kiss to Amelia's lips before stepping back as if he had touched something hot. They rode to his ranch in a wagon, the silence between them heavy and awkward. Amelia clutched her bag and stared at the rolling hills covered in dry grass. The ranch house, when they reached it, was a low structure made of wood and stone, practical rather than pretty. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. "It is not much," Yates said, helping her down from the wagon, "but it is solid. 2,500 acres. I run about 800 head of cattle." "It is fine," Amelia said, because what else could she say? He carried her bag inside and showed her around. The house was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man who lived alone. There was a main room with a fireplace and a dining table, a kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms. He set her bag in the larger bedroom. "This will be yours," he said. "I will take the other room." Amelia felt her cheeks flush. "We are married." "I know what we are." His voice was not unkind. "But I will not force anything on you. You can decide when and if you want more than a marriage on paper." She did not know whether to feel relieved or insulted, so she simply nodded. That first evening set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Yates would come in from working the ranch, wash up at the pump outside, and sit down at the table for supper. Amelia would cook what she could with the supplies in the pantry, though her Boston upbringing had not prepared her well for frontier cooking. The first few meals were near disasters, but Yates ate them without complaint. The strange thing was that Amelia never sat down to eat with him. The first night, she had served his plate and then stood by the stove, eating her own portion while standing. It was a habit from her last year in Boston, when she had worked as a maid in the Whitmore household after her father died. The staff ate standing in the kitchen, always ready to jump if the family needed something. The posture had become so ingrained that sitting at the table felt wrong, presumptuous. Yates had noticed, of course. That first night, he had stood up from the table and pulled out the chair across from him. "Amelia, sit down and eat properly." "I am fine here," she had said, not meeting his eyes. "You are my wife, not my servant. Please sit." But she could not make herself do it. The thought of sitting down, of pretending they were a normal married couple, made her throat close up. She shook her head and stayed where she was, and eventually Yates had sat back down and finished his meal in silence. The second night he tried again. He pulled out her chair and stood beside it, waiting. "Please," he said quietly, "it does not feel right, you standing there while I sit." "I prefer it this way," Amelia said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Please, just let me be." He had searched her face for a long moment, then nodded and returned to his own seat. But from that night on, he pulled out her chair every single evening before he sat down himself. He never said anything more about it, never tried to force her to sit. He simply pulled out the chair and waited for a few seconds before taking his own seat. It became a ritual between them, silent and strange. The days fell into a rhythm. Yates would rise before dawn and work until dusk, mending fences, tending cattle, fixing the 100 things that always needed fixing on a ranch. Amelia would clean the house, attempt to cook, and tend the small vegetable garden behind the house that had gone wild. She found a few chickens in the barn and started collecting eggs, which improved their meals considerably. They spoke little beyond practical matters. Yates was not a talkative man by nature, and Amelia was still too raw, too uncertain of her place in this new life. But she began to notice things about him. The way he was gentle with the horses, how he always left the easiest chores for the heat of the day so he could do the hardest work in the relative cool of morning and evening. The care he took with his tools, cleaning and oiling them before he put them away. One evening in early May, a storm rolled in with frightening speed. Amelia was hanging laundry when the wind kicked up, nearly tearing the sheets from her hands. She heard Yates shouting from the barn and saw him leading the horses into their stalls. The sky had turned a sickly green-gray. She abandoned the laundry and ran for the house just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Within minutes, the rain was coming down in sheets, driven by wind that made the house creak and groan. Lightning cracked across the sky, so close that the thunder was instantaneous and deafening. Amelia stood at the window, watching the storm with a mixture of fear and awe. She had never seen weather like this in Boston. The door burst open and Yates stumbled in, soaked to the skin. "Are you all right?" he asked, water dripping from his hat. "Yes, I am fine. Are the animals secure?" "Everything is battened down." He peeled off his wet coat and hung it by the door. "This should blow through in an hour or two. Spring storms come up fast out here." They stood together in the dimness, listening to the rain hammer the roof. In the flickering light from the oil lamp, Amelia saw Yates looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are handling this better than I expected," he said. "The ranch, I mean, the isolation. Some women from back east, they cannot take it." "I am stronger than I look," Amelia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "I have had to be. Your letter did not say much about your family." She turned back to the window. "There is not much to tell. My mother died of consumption. My father died drowning his sorrows in drink and cards. I had nothing left in Boston but debts and bad memories. I am sorry. And your parents?" she asked, wanting to turn the conversation away from herself. "Fever took them both 3 years ago within a week of each other. It swept through San Andreas that summer. A lot of folks died." His voice was matter of fact, but she heard the grief underneath. "They built this place from nothing. My father always said the land would take care of us if we took care of it. You must miss them terribly." "Every day," he paused. "That is part of why I sent for a bride, if I am being honest. This house, it felt too empty, too quiet. I thought maybe having someone else here would make it feel like a home again." Amelia felt something shift in her chest. "Does it?" "It is starting to," he said softly. The storm passed, as he had predicted, leaving the air clean and cool. They ate supper late that night, and as always, Yates pulled out her chair. Amelia stood by the stove with her plate, and he sat down alone. But something had changed between them. Some small wall had begun to crack. The next morning, Amelia found a calf tangled in the fence near the eastern pasture. Its leg was badly cut, and it was bawling pitifully. She knew nothing about cattle, but she could not leave it suffering. She ran to find Yates, who was working on the barn roof. "There is a calf hurt by the fence," she called up to him. He climbed down immediately, grabbed some supplies from the barn, and followed her to where the calf was struggling. Working together, they got it untangled. Yates examined the leg with gentle hands. "It is not broken, but the cut needs cleaning or it will go bad. Can you hold her steady?" Amelia knelt in the dirt and wrapped her arms around the calf, murmuring nonsense to keep it calm while Yates cleaned and bandaged the wound. The calf kicked and struggled, but Amelia held on, getting covered in mud and manure in the process. "Good," Yates said when he finished. "You can let her go now." The calf scrambled up and limped away toward its mother. Amelia sat back on her heels, laughing at the state of herself. Her dress was ruined, her hair was falling out of its pins, and she probably smelled like a barn. Yates grinned at her, and it transformed his usually serious face. "You look like you have been wrestling steers." "I feel like it too." She accepted his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Will the calf be all right?" "Should be, thanks to you spotting it. If it had been out there much longer, the leg might have gone bad enough to lose." He had not let go of her hand. "You did good, Amelia." It was the first time he had praised her for anything, and warmth spread through her chest. "I could not just leave it. A lot of people would have. They would say it is just a calf, not worth the trouble." He squeezed her hand once before letting go. "You have a good heart." After that day, Amelia started spending more time outside learning about the ranch. Yates taught her how to milk the cow he kept for their own use, how to tell if a fence needed mending, how to read the sky for weather. She was not particularly good at any of it, but she tried, and he was patient with her mistakes. One afternoon in late May, they rode out together to check on the herd in the northern pasture. Amelia had never been much of a rider, but Yates had given her the gentlest mare on the ranch, and she was slowly gaining confidence. "Tell me about San Andreas," she said as they rode. "You said your family came in the gold rush." They did, but my father was smart enough to see that the real money was in supplying the miners, not in mining. He and my mother ran a store for a while, saved their earnings and bought this land. Started with 50 head of cattle and built it up from there. Yates gestured at the rolling hills around them. San Andreas used to be bigger back in the 50s. When the gold played out, a lot of folks left. Now we are down to maybe 300 people. But the ones who stayed, we are a community. Everyone looks out for each other. Do you ever wish you had tried to find gold instead? He shook his head. Gold makes men crazy. I have seen it. They tear up the land, fight each other, waste their lives chasing something that might not be there. This, though, he patted his horse's neck, this is real. The land, the cattle, the work. It is hard, but it is honest. They crested a hill and looked down at the herd grazing peacefully. The late afternoon sun turned everything golden. Amelia felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety she had been carrying since Boston. "It is beautiful here," she said quietly. "I did not expect that." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Something harsher, I suppose, more brutal." "It can be harsh," Yates said. "Drought, fire, hard winters. But there is beauty too if you know how to look for it." They rode back in companionable silence. That night at supper, Amelia found herself watching Yates as he ate, noticing the way the lamplight caught in his hair, the strength in his hands. When he finished his meal and stood to clear his plate, she spoke without thinking. "Why did you really send for a bride?" He paused, plate in hand. "I told you, the house felt empty. But why me? Why did you choose my letter?" He set the plate down and turned to face her. "You want the truth?" "Yes. Your letter was different from the others. Most of them, the women wrote about how excited they were for adventure, how the West seemed so romantic. You did not write any of that. You wrote about losing your mother and needing a fresh start. You were honest about being afraid." I respected that. He leaned against the counter. I figured a woman who could be honest about her fears would be strong enough to handle the reality of this life. And am I strong enough? You tell me. You are the one still here. Amelia looked down at her hands, at the calluses forming from work she had never done before. "I am still here," she agreed. That night, lying in her bed, Amelia admitted to herself that she was starting to have feelings for her husband. Real feelings, not just gratitude or companionship. She thought about his rare smiles, his patience, the way he tried every single night to get her to sit at the table like she deserved to be there. The way he never pushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. In early June, they rode into San Andreas for supplies. It was Amelia's first real visit to the town since her arrival. Yates introduced her to the shopkeeper, Mr. Chen, who had come from China to work on the railroads and stayed to open a general store. Mrs. Henderson greeted her warmly at the boarding house. The blacksmith, a freed slave named Samuel Jackson who had come west after the war, tipped his hat to her. But not everyone was friendly. A woman named Mrs. Cartwright, whose husband owned the saloon, looked Amelia up and down with obvious disdain. "A mail-order bride," she said loudly to her companion. "Imagine being so desperate." Amelia felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Yates stepped close to her side. "Imagine being so bitter," he said evenly. "Good day, Mrs. Cartwright." He guided Amelia away with a gentle hand on her back. "Do not pay her any mind. She has been trying to marry off her daughter to every unmarried man in the county for 5 years with no success. She is just jealous." "Does it bother you," Amelia asked, "that I came here as a mail-order bride?" "Why would it bother me? I am the one who sent for you." He looked down at her. "Anyone who has a problem with how we married can take it up with me." That evening, after they returned to the ranch, Amelia cooked supper with special care. She had bought fresh vegetables and a cut of beef from Mr. Chen, and she made a stew that actually tasted good. When Yates came in and washed up, she watched him pull out her chair as he always did. This time, she walked over and stood beside it. Yates froze, his hand still on the back of the chair, his eyes searching hers. "I cannot," she whispered. "Not yet, but maybe soon," he nodded slowly. "Whenever you are ready, or never, that is your choice." But something had shifted again, another crack in the walls she had built around herself. She was starting to trust that he meant what he said, that he would wait for her, that he saw her as more than just a convenience. A week later, disaster struck. Amelia woke in the middle of the night to the sound of horses screaming. She ran to the window and saw flames leaping from the barn. Without thinking, she grabbed a shawl and raced outside in her nightgown. Yates was already there, trying to lead the terrified horses out of the burning structure. Smoke billowed out the doors, thick and black. Amelia ran to help, grabbing the halter of the nearest horse and pulling it toward safety. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. "Get back," Yates shouted at her. "It is not safe, neither is letting the horses burn," she shouted back. Together they managed to get all 4 horses out, along with the cow, before the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. They stood in the yard, coughing and soot-stained, watching the barn burn. There was no saving it now, nothing to do but make sure the fire did not spread to the house or the grass. "The hay," Yates said hoarsely. "All the winter hay was in there." Amelia looked at his face, lit by the flames, and saw devastation. The barn had been built by his father. The hay represented his ability to feed the herd through the next winter. This was not just property burning, it was his legacy, his livelihood. She grabbed his hand and held it tight. "We will figure it out. We will rebuild." He looked down at their joined hands, then at her face. "You could have been killed, so could you? That is different. This is my ranch, my responsibility." "It is our ranch," Amelia said firmly. "I am your wife, remember, for better or worse. I think a barn fire counts as worse." Something broke in his expression, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She wrapped her arms around him and held on just as fiercely, both of them shaking with adrenaline and relief and fear. When the fire finally burned itself out, leaving only smoldering ruins, they went back to the house. Amelia heated water so they could wash the soot off, and then, without discussing it, she followed Yates to his bedroom and climbed into his bed. He held her through the rest of the night, both of them fully clothed, just needing the comfort of another person. The next day they assessed the damage in the harsh light of morning. The barn was a total loss, along with all the hay, some tools, and several months of hard work. But the horses and cow were safe, the house was untouched, and they were alive. Samuel Jackson came by that afternoon, having seen the smoke from town. By evening, half of San Andreas had turned up to help. The men worked on clearing the debris while the women brought food and supplies. Even Mrs. Cartwright came, though she did not apologize for her earlier rudeness. "This is what I meant about community," Yates told Amelia as they watched their neighbors work. "Out here, we take care of our own." Over the next 3 weeks, a new barn rose from the ashes of the old one. It was a community effort, everyone contributing labor or materials. Yates tried to pay them, but they refused. "You would do the same for us," Samuel said. "That is how it works." Amelia threw herself into helping however she could. She cooked for the workers, hauled water, and even helped with some of the lighter construction work. She was exhausted every night, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from honest work toward a worthwhile goal. One evening, about halfway through the rebuilding, she and Yates sat on the porch watching the sunset. His arm was around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "I have been thinking," she said, "about why I could not sit at the table." He did not say anything, just waited for her to continue. "After my father died, I went to work for a wealthy family. I was a maid, and we were not allowed to sit while the family ate. We had to be ready to serve at any moment. I think part of me still feels like a servant, like I do not deserve to sit." She took a shaky breath. "And part of me is afraid that if I sit down, if I let myself believe this is real, something will happen to take it away." Yates pulled her closer. "Nothing is going to take this away. You are not a servant, Amelia. You are my wife, my partner. You have earned your place here 100 times over." "I know that in my head," she said, "but my heart is still catching up." "Then we will wait for your heart," he said simply. She turned in his arms and kissed him. It was the first time she had initiated any physical affection, and she felt him go still with surprise before he kissed her back, gentle and careful. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I am starting to fall in love with you," she whispered. "That terrifies me." "I fell in love with you the day you helped with the calf," he admitted. "You had manure on your face and you were laughing, and I thought, this woman is exactly what I have been looking for. Even though I will not sit at the table, especially because of that, because it means something to you when you finally do." The new barn was completed in late June, just in time for Yates to cut the hay from his fields. The whole community turned out for the barn-raising celebration, with food and music and dancing. Amelia found herself being hugged by women she barely knew, being told she was part of San Andreas now. She danced with Yates under the stars, his hands warm on her waist, and felt something she had not felt since before her mother died. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone again, Amelia went to Yates's room and knocked on his door. He opened it, surprise and hope warring on his face. "I am ready," she said. "If you are." He reached out and took her hand. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." He drew her inside and closed the door, and they consummated their marriage with tenderness and care. Afterwards, lying in his arms, Amelia felt like she had finally come home. The summer passed in a haze of work and slowly deepening love. Amelia learned to ride well enough that she could help Yates move the herd to fresh pasture. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to preserve vegetables for the winter, to read the signs of illness in the cattle. Yates, in turn, learned about her nightmares, her fears, her dreams. He learned that she loved poetry and had once wanted to be a teacher. He learned that she sang while she worked, though she would stop if she thought he was listening. In August, they took a trip to Sacramento to buy supplies that were not available in San Andreas. It was Amelia's first time in a real city since leaving Boston, and she found herself overwhelmed by the noise and crowds. Yates stayed close to her side, his hand on the small of her back, guiding her through the chaos. They stayed 2 nights at a hotel, a luxury that felt strange after months on the ranch. The second evening, as they dressed for dinner, Yates presented her with a small box. "I know I did not court you properly," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I did not bring you flowers or take you to dances or any of the things a man should do. I want to make that up to you." Inside the box was a delicate silver locket on a chain. Amelia opened it with trembling fingers and found 2 tiny photographs, one of each of them. "When did you have these made?" she asked, tears pricking her eyes. "This morning while you were shopping. I wanted you to have something nice, something that was just for you." She kissed him, not caring that they were in a hotel room with the door open. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," he said with a rueful laugh. "But I am trying." They ate dinner in the hotel restaurant, and it struck Amelia how comfortable they had become with each other. Yates told her about his childhood, about learning to rope cattle from his father, about his mother's insistence that he learn to read and write even though they lived on a ranch. Amelia told him about her mother's love of music, about the piano they'd had to sell when her father's debts mounted, about her secret dream of having a home where music and laughter filled the rooms. "We could get a piano," Yates said. "Maybe not a fancy one, but I bet we could find something. That would cost a fortune to ship out here. It would be worth it to see you happy." On the train ride home, Amelia fell asleep with her head on Yates's shoulder, the locket warm against her skin. She woke to find him watching her with such tenderness that it made her chest ache. "What?" she asked sleepily. "Nothing. Just thinking how lucky I am." September brought the roundup, when all the ranchers in the area gathered their herds to count the cattle, brand the calves, and separate out the animals to be sold. It was hard, dusty work that lasted from sunup to sundown for nearly 2 weeks. Amelia helped in the camp, cooking for the crew of cowboys Yates had hired to help with the roundup. It was during the roundup that Amelia truly saw Yates in his element. He sat a horse like he was born to it, roping and cutting cattle with practiced ease. The other men clearly respected him, following his lead without question. She felt a surge of pride watching him work. One of the hired hands, a young man named Tom, made the mistake of making a crude comment about Amelia within Yates's hearing. Yates had him off the ranch within the hour, despite being short-handed. "I will not have anyone disrespect my wife," he told the other men flatly. Anyone else have something they want to say? No one did. That night, after the camp had settled down, Amelia found Yates checking on the horses. "You did not have to fire Tom," she said. "We need the help." "I absolutely did have to fire him. What he said was unacceptable." "I have heard worse." "Not on my ranch, you have not." He turned to face her. "You deserve respect, Amelia, from everyone, including me, especially me." She wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her head on his chest. "How did I get so lucky?" "I ask myself the same question every day," he murmured into her hair. The roundup was successful, bringing in more money than Yates had expected. After paying the hands and settling his accounts, he took Amelia back to Sacramento and bought the piano he had promised her. It took 6 men and 2 wagons to get it to the ranch, but when it was finally installed in the main room, Amelia sat down and played for the first time in over a year. Her fingers were stiff at first, fumbling over keys she used to know by heart. But slowly, haltingly, the music came back to her. She played a simple folk song her mother had taught her, and when she finished, she found Yates standing in the doorway with tears on his cheeks. "That was beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Play more." She played until her fingers ached and her heart felt full to bursting. And when she finally stood up from the bench, Yates pulled her into his arms and waltzed her around the room to music only they could hear. That night at supper, as had become their ritual, Yates pulled out Amelia's chair. She stood by the stove with her plate, as she had done every night for the past 6 months. But tonight was different. Tonight she looked at the chair, then at Yates, and she felt the last of her fear crumble away. She walked over and sat down. Yates stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mixture of shock and joy. Then he sat down across from her, reached across the table, and took her hand. "Welcome home, Amelia," he said softly. She squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I am home," she agreed. "I am finally home." They ate together in comfortable silence, hands linked across the table. It was just a simple supper on a Tuesday night in September, but it felt like the most important meal of Amelia's life. She had finally let go of the past, finally allowed herself to believe she deserved this happiness. After dinner, They sat together on the porch as they often did, watching the stars come out. Amelia rested her head on Yates's shoulder and thought about how much had changed since that terrifying day when she stepped off the train. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked quietly. "Answering my advertisement." "Never," Amelia said immediately. "Do you regret sending for me?" "Not for one single second." As autumn deepened, Amelia settled fully into her role as rancher's wife. She took over the ranch accounts, discovering she had a head for numbers that made Yates's record-keeping look chaotic in comparison. She organized the pantry, planted bulbs that would bloom in the spring, and started making plans for expanding the vegetable garden next year. In October, she realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She counted back the weeks and felt a flutter of combined excitement and fear. She waited another week to be sure, then told Yates one evening after supper. "I think I might be with child," she said, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. Yates went very still. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I have all the signs." He stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over, then pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Amelia asked, even though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. Terrified, excited, amazed, all of it. They rode into San Andreas the next day to see Doc Morrison, an older man who had been practicing medicine in the area for 30 years. He confirmed what Amelia already knew. She was about 2 months along, with the baby due in late April or early May. "First baby?" Doc Morrison asked kindly. "Yes," Amelia said. "Well, you are healthy and strong. I do not foresee any problems, but I want to see you once a month to keep an eye on things. And Yates, you take good care of her. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest, good food." "I will take care of her," Yates promised. He was as good as his word. He became almost comically protective, trying to do every chore himself so Amelia would not strain herself. She finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "The doctor said no heavy lifting," she told him firmly. "He did not say I had to spend 9 months sitting on the sofa. I can still cook and clean and do light work. I will go crazy if you try to wrap me in cotton wool." "I just want you safe," Yates said. "Both of you, we will be safe." "But I need to stay active, or I really will lose my mind." They compromised. Amelia continued with her regular chores but let Yates handle anything strenuous. He hired a young man from town, Peter Chen, Samuel Jackson's nephew, to help with the daily ranch work so he could spend more time close to the house. The winter was mild by California standards, with only a few cold snaps and some rain. Amelia's belly grew steadily, and with it grew her anticipation. She sewed tiny clothes from fabric she ordered through Mr. Chen's store. She read everything she could find about caring for infants. She and Yates turned the smaller bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and building a cradle from pine wood on Christmas morning. Yates gave her a rocking chair he had made himself, perfectly sized for nursing a baby. Amelia gave him a quilt she had sewn from scraps of their clothing, pieces of their lives stitched together into something new and beautiful. "For our baby," she said. "So he or she will always be wrapped in us." They spent Christmas Day quietly at the ranch, just the two of them and the child growing between them. It was peaceful and perfect, so different from the loneliness of the previous Christmas for both of them. In January, a harsh winter storm swept through, dropping temperatures and bringing wind that howled around the house. Amelia woke in the middle of the night to find Yates gone from bed. She pulled on her robe and found him in the main room, feeding logs into the fireplace. "Could not sleep," he said when he saw her. "Too much wind, worried about the cattle, always." He patted the sofa beside him. "But they are in the shelter of the Southern Valley. They should be all right." Amelia sat down and he tucked a blanket around her, his hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby kicked and Yates's face lit up with wonder. "Still amazes me every time," he said. "There is a whole person in there." "Our person," Amelia said. "Part you, part me, part something entirely new." "Have you thought about names?" They had been avoiding the subject, both superstitious about planning too much before the baby arrived safely. But now, in the warm darkness with the wind howling outside, it felt like the right time. "For a boy, I thought maybe William after my father," Amelia said hesitantly. "Despite everything, he was a good man before the gambling took hold. He would have loved being a grandfather." "William is a good, strong name," Yates agreed. "What about for a girl? I do not know." "What was your mother's name?" "Rose. Rose Elizabeth. I like Elizabeth. Or maybe a leaner, something strong." They talked through the night, making plans and dreaming dreams while the storm raged outside and the fire kept them warm. By morning, the wind had died down and the world was calm again. Yates went out to check on the herd and returned with good news. Only 2 cows lost, better than he had feared. February and March passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Amelia grew larger and more uncomfortable, and Yates grew more anxious. He made her promise to send for him immediately if she felt anything unusual, even if he was all the way out in the far pastures. "I will not have you facing this alone," he said. "Women have babies every day," Amelia reminded him. "I will be fine." But she was touched by his concern, by the way he treated her like she was precious. Every night he pulled out her chair at dinner, and every night she sat down, and the simple ritual had become a symbol of everything they had built together. In early April, Amelia woke in the night with a dull ache in her lower back. She tried to go back to sleep, but the ache grew stronger, spreading around to her belly. She touched Yates's shoulder and he was awake instantly. "Is it time?" he asked. "I think it might be," she said, trying to sound calm despite the flutter of fear in her chest. Yates dressed faster than she had ever seen and rode into San Andreas to fetch Doc Morrison and Mrs. Henderson, who had experience as a midwife. Then he came back and stayed by Amelia's side, holding her hand through the contractions that grew steadily stronger and closer together. Doc Morrison arrived just after dawn, with Mrs. Henderson right behind him. They shooed Yates out of the bedroom, and he paced the main room like a caged animal while Amelia labored. It was long and hard and painful, but through it all, Amelia clung to the knowledge that Yates was just outside the door, that she was not alone, that she was bringing their child into a world full of love. Just after noon, a baby's cry filled the house. Mrs. Henderson opened the door and beckoned to Yates. "Come meet your son," she said with a smile. Yates stumbled into the room like a man in a dream. Amelia sat propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "We have a son," she said. "We have a beautiful, perfect son." Yates knelt beside the bed and gazed down at the baby with absolute awe. The child had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus. His tiny hand waved in the air, and Yates offered his finger. The baby gripped it with surprising strength. "Hello, William," Yates said, his voice breaking. "I am your father. I am going to do my best to be worthy of you." Amelia reached out and touched Yates's face. "You are already worthy. You are the best man I know." Doc Morrison and Mrs. Henderson left them alone after making sure both mother and baby were healthy. Yates climbed carefully onto the bed and put his arm around Amelia, and together they marveled at the miracle they had created. "I love you," Yates said. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Amelia whispered. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me time to heal. You gave me this." Baby William made a small sound, and they both laughed, giddy with exhaustion and joy. The first weeks with a newborn were harder than either of them had anticipated. William was a good baby, but he needed to eat every few hours, which meant neither Amelia nor Yates got much sleep. Yates hired Peter Chen full-time so he could help more with the baby. He learned to change nappies, to walk the floor when William was fussy, to give Amelia breaks so she could rest. The community rallied around them again, with the women bringing food and offering advice, the men helping Yates keep up with the ranch work. Amelia was overwhelmed by the kindness, by the way San Andreas had truly become her home. One evening in late May, when William was about 6 weeks old, Amelia put him down for the night and came into the kitchen to find Yates preparing dinner. It was a simple meal, just soup and bread, but he had set the table carefully, and he pulled out her chair with a flourish. "My lady," he said with exaggerated formality. Amelia sat down with a tired laugh. "We are a far cry from lords and ladies." "I do not know about that. You are the lady of this ranch, which makes you pretty important in my book." He sat down across from her and took her hand. "How are you holding up?" "Tired," she admitted, "but happy, so happy." They ate in comfortable silence, and Amelia reflected on how far they had come. A year ago, she had been terrified and alone, standing on a train platform about to marry a stranger. Now she sat across from the man she loved more than life itself, with their child sleeping peacefully in the next room. After dinner, they sat on the porch as they had done so many evenings before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, they could hear the cattle lowing and the horses moving in the pasture. "You ever think about that first night?" Amelia asked. "When I would not sit at the table all the time," Yates admitted. "I was so confused. I thought maybe I had done something wrong, or you did not want to be here." "I was so scared," Amelia said. "Scared that if I let myself believe this was real, it would all fall apart, that you would turn out to be cruel, or we would lose the ranch, or something terrible would happen. And now I know that terrible things might happen. The barn fire proved that, but I also know that we can face them together. That is what being married means, is it not? Facing life together, the good and the bad." Yates pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I could not have said it better myself." Baby William cried from inside, and Amelia stood to go to him. Yates stood too. "I will get him," he said. "You rest." She watched him go inside, her heart so full it almost hurt. This life was not what she had imagined back in Boston, but it was better than anything she could have dreamed. She had a home, a family, a community. She had love. Summer arrived with blazing heat and long golden days. William grew and thrived, becoming more alert and responsive. He would watch his parents with serious dark eyes, as if trying to understand this strange new world he had entered. Amelia spent hours with him, singing songs her mother had taught her, reading to him from the books Yates bought on their trips to Sacramento. The ranch prospered too. The spring calves were strong and healthy, the grass was abundant, and Yates's hard work was paying off. He was able to buy an adjacent parcel of land, expanding the ranch by another 500 acres. In July, San Andreas held its annual summer fair. Amelia entered some of her preserves and baked goods in the competition, and won a blue ribbon for her strawberry jam. She was irrationally proud of that ribbon, displaying it prominently in the kitchen. At the fair, they ran into Mrs. Cartwright, who cooed over baby William with surprising warmth. "He is a beautiful child," she said. "You two must be very proud." "We are," Yates said, his arm around Amelia's waist. After Mrs. Cartwright walked away, Amelia turned to Yates with raised eyebrows. What happened to her? Her daughter finally got married last month to a man from Sacramento. Maybe she is just happier now that she does not have to worry about it anymore. He shrugged. People can surprise you. They danced that night under the stars again, William sleeping peacefully in his basket while the band played. Yates held Amelia close, swaying to the music. This time last year you could barely stand to be in the same room with me, he murmured against her hair. That is not true. I just did not know how to be in the same room with you. There is a difference. And now I cannot imagine being anywhere else. As autumn approached again, Amelia found herself reflecting on the passage of time. A year ago, she had been terrified of sitting at the dinner table. Now she sat there every night without a second thought, chatting with Yates about the day's events while William gurgled in his cradle nearby. The fear that had once consumed her seemed like a distant memory. In September, during the roundup, Amelia helped again with the cooking, this time with William strapped to her back in a carrier Yates had fashioned. The baby seemed to enjoy the activity, his eyes wide as he took in all the sights and sounds. One of the hired hands, an older cowboy named Dutch, watched Amelia working with obvious approval. "You got yourself a good one, Quinlan," he told Yates. "Not many city women could handle ranch life the way she does." "I know how lucky I am," Yates said, watching Amelia laugh at something Mrs. Henderson had said. The roundup was even more successful than the previous year, bringing in enough money that Yates could afford to hire 2 permanent ranch hands. This meant he could spend more time with Amelia and William, which made all of them happy. As winter approached, they settled into a comfortable rhythm. Yates would work during the day while Amelia managed the house and cared for William. In the evenings, they would eat dinner together, then sit by the fire with William between them. Yates would read aloud from the newspaper or a book while Amelia sewed or knitted. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, built piece by piece through trust and patience and love. In December, just before Christmas, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. She told Yates on Christmas morning, presenting the news like a gift. He was overjoyed, spinning her around the kitchen despite her laughing protests. "Another baby. William is going to be a big brother. Are you happy?" Amelia asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "I am the happiest man alive," he said. "How could I not be? I have you, I have William, I have the ranch, and now another baby on the way. I have everything I ever wanted and more besides." They spent the holiday quietly again, just the 3 of them and the promise of the 4th growing inside Amelia. William, now 8 months old, was fascinated by the decorations they had put up, reaching for the pine boughs with chubby hands. "He is going to be such a good big brother," Amelia said, watching William play. "He gets that from you," Yates said. "The caring, the gentleness. Those are your gifts." "He gets his stubbornness from you," Amelia teased. "That is not stubbornness, that is determination," Yates protested, but he was grinning. The new year, 1884, arrived with hope and promise. Amelia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and William continued to grow and develop. He took his first steps in March, wobbling across the floor into Yates's waiting arms. They both cried, overwhelmed by the milestone. In early May, when the wildflowers were blooming across the hills and the weather was perfect, Amelia went into labor again. This time it was faster, and by evening she had delivered a healthy baby girl. "We have a daughter," she told Yates, cradling the tiny infant. "We have our Alina." Yates gazed down at his daughter with the same awe he had shown William. Alina had wisps of light hair and eyes that Amelia suspected would turn blue like her father's. "She is perfect," he breathed. "You are perfect. How did I get so lucky?" William toddled into the room, guided by Mrs. Henderson, and peered curiously at his new sister. He reached out one finger to touch her tiny hand, and Alina's fingers closed around it reflexively. William's face lit up with a huge smile. "Baby," he said clearly. It was one of his few words, and it made everyone in the room laugh. Life with two children was chaotic and exhausting, but it was also filled with more love than Amelia had thought possible. She and Yates worked together seamlessly now, partners in every sense of the word. They took turns with the children, shared the household duties, and made all the major ranch decisions together. One evening in late summer, after both children were finally asleep, Amelia and Yates collapsed onto the sofa. "I am exhausted," Amelia said, leaning against Yates's shoulder. "Me too," he admitted, "but it is a good kind of tired." "The best kind," she agreed. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night. After a few minutes, Yates spoke again. "You remember when you first got here? How you would not even look at me most of the time." "I was terrified," Amelia said. "I thought you would be like my father or like the men I had known in Boston, demanding and harsh." "What changed your mind?" Amelia thought about it. "Little things. The way you were gentle with the animals. How you never pushed me to be more than I was ready to be. The fact that you pulled out my chair every single night, even though I would not sit in it. You were patient with me when I had given you no reason to be." "You had every reason to be cautious," Yates said. "You had been through so much. I wanted to prove to you that not all men were bad, that I could be someone you could trust." "You proved it," Amelia said softly. "Every single day you prove it." As the months passed, Alina grew from a tiny infant into a curious baby, and William became more independent and adventurous. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing Yates to make improvements he had only dreamed of before. He built a new chicken coop, expanded the vegetable garden, and even added a small orchard. Amelia took on more responsibility in the community, helping to organize a school for the children of San Andreas. She discovered she had a talent for teaching, working with the children several days a week while Mrs. Henderson watched Alina and William. In the spring of 1885, 3 years after Amelia had first arrived in San Andreas, the town held a celebration for its 30th anniversary. There was a parade, speeches, and a big dance in the evening. Amelia and Yates attended with both children, now part of the fabric of the community. During the dance, the mayor gave a speech about the people who had built San Andreas, the ones who had stayed when others left, who had worked hard and raised families and created something lasting. He called out several families by name, including the Quinlans. "Yates and Amelia Quinlan represent the best of what San Andreas is all about," the mayor said. "Hard work, dedication, and community spirit. They came together as strangers and built a life that makes us all proud. Let us raise a glass to them and to all the families who make this town great." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes as the crowd applauded. She looked at Yates, who was holding Alina while William clung to his leg, and felt a rush of profound gratitude. This was her family. This was her home. Later that night, after the children were asleep and they were getting ready for bed, Yates pulled Amelia into his arms. "3 years ago tonight you stepped off that train," he said. "Best day of my life." "Mine too," Amelia said, "though I did not know it at the time." "What do you think your life would have been like if you had not answered my advertisement?" Amelia shuddered. "I try not to think about it. Nothing good, I am sure. I had no prospects, no family, no future in Boston. I would have ended up in a factory or worse. I would have stayed alone on this ranch, getting more bitter and isolated every year," Yates said. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you were here." They stood together in the quiet darkness, holding each other close. Through the window they could see the stars spreading across the sky, bright and eternal. "Do you ever regret sitting down at that table?" Yates asked suddenly. Amelia pulled back to look at him in surprise. "What a strange question. Of course not. Why would I? I do not know. I just wonder sometimes if pushing you, even gently, was the right thing to do. If I should have just let you stand if that was what made you comfortable." "You did let me stand," Amelia reminded him. "For 6 months, you pulled out that chair every single night and never said a word when I did not sit in it. You gave me the time I needed to heal, to learn to trust again. And when I finally did sit down, it was because I was ready, not because you forced me." "I just want you to be happy," Yates said quietly. "I am happy. I am happier than I ever thought I could be." She cupped his face in her hands. "You gave me that. You and this place and our children. You gave me a reason to stop being afraid." They made love that night with a tenderness born of deep familiarity and deeper love. Afterwards, Amelia lay in Yates's arms and thought about how far she had come, how much she had grown. She was not the frightened, broken girl who had stepped off the train 3 years ago. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a teacher. She was whole. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. William started school, showing a quick mind and a love of reading that delighted Amelia. Eleanor proved to be a tomboy, following Yates around the ranch and begging to help with the horses. In 1887, Amelia gave birth to another son, James, and in 1889, another daughter, Catherine. The ranch grew too, now encompassing over 4,000 acres and supporting a herd of more than 1,500 cattle. Yates hired a foreman to help manage the daily operations, which gave him more time to spend with his growing family. Through it all, the evening ritual continued. Every night, no matter how busy or tired they were, Yates pulled out Amelia's chair before they sat down to dinner. It had long since ceased to be about Amelia's old fears and had become simply a gesture of love, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. The children grew up watching their father perform this small act of devotion every night, and it shaped their understanding of how a man should treat a woman. William, when he was old enough to understand, asked his mother about it. "Why does Papa always pull out your chair?" He asked one day when he was about 10. Amelia thought carefully about how to answer. "When I first came here, I was very sad and very scared. I had lost my family and my home, and I did not know if I could trust your father. Pulling out my chair was his way of showing me that I mattered, that I deserved respect and kindness. Even when I could not accept it, he kept offering it. That is what love is, William. It is showing up every day and offering kindness, even when it is not immediately accepted." William nodded seriously, absorbing this. "When I get married, I am going to pull out my wife's chair too." Amelia hugged him tight, blinking back tears. "I think you will make some woman very happy one day." In 1890, San Andreas got its first telephone line, connecting the town to Sacramento and the wider world. Yates had one installed at the ranch, a modern convenience that still felt like magic to Amelia. They could now call the doctor or the feed store without riding into town, though the children found the device both fascinating and slightly frightening. That same year, tragedy struck when a disease swept through the cattle, killing nearly a third of the herd. It was a devastating loss, both financially and emotionally. Yates threw himself into trying to save the remaining cattle, often working 18-hour days. Amelia watched him exhausting himself and finally intervened. She found him in the barn late one night, checking on a sick cow. "You need to rest," she said gently. "You are going to make yourself sick." "I cannot rest while the herd is dying," he said, his voice rough with fatigue and frustration. "The herd is not dying. We lost some cattle, but most of them are fine." And we will rebuild, just like we did after the barn fire. She took his hand and pulled him toward the house. But I cannot rebuild if I lose you. Please, come to bed. He let her lead him inside, and she helped him wash and change, treating him with the same gentle care he had always shown her. In bed, he clung to her like a drowning man. I am supposed to take care of you, he mumbled against her shoulder. Supposed to provide to keep everything safe. We take care of each other, Amelia said firmly. That is what marriage is. You do not have to carry everything alone. It took months, but they did rebuild. With careful management and some help from neighboring ranchers, they restocked the herd and recovered from the loss. It was one more challenge they faced together and overcame. By 1892, 10 years after Amelia had first arrived in San Andreas, they had 4 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and a marriage that had only grown stronger with time. William was now 10, Eleanor 8, James 5, and Catherine 3. The house was always full of noise and laughter, a far cry from the silent, empty place it had been when Amelia first arrived. On their 10th anniversary, Yates arranged for Mrs. Henderson to watch the children for a night so he could take Amelia to Sacramento. They stayed at the same hotel where they had stayed years before, and Yates took her to the finest restaurant in the city. 10 years, he said, raising his glass of wine. 10 years since you stepped off that train and changed my life forever. Changed both our lives, Amelia corrected, clinking her glass against his. I was so frightened that day, I thought I was making a terrible mistake. Were you? Was it a mistake? It was the best decision I ever made, Amelia said without hesitation. You gave me everything I had lost and so much more besides. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I had forgotten what that felt like. After dinner, they walked through the city streets, hand in hand like young lovers. They talked about everything and nothing, remembering the early days of their marriage, marveling at how their children were growing, making plans for the future. I want to expand the orchard, Yates said. Really make it something special. Maybe we could sell fruit as well as beef, diversify a bit. I think that is a wonderful idea, Amelia said. And I want to write a book of recipes and household tips for frontier living. Mrs. Henderson thinks we could sell it through the general stores in the area. My wife, the author, Yates said with a grin. I like it. They made love that night in the hotel room, and it was as passionate and tender as their first time, years of knowing each other's bodies and hearts making every touch meaningful. Afterwards, lying tangled together, Amelia traced the lines of Yates's face with her finger. You know what I think about sometimes? She asked. What? That first night when you pulled out my chair and I would not sit in it. I wonder what you were thinking. I was thinking that I had made a terrible mistake, Yates admitted. That you hated me or hated the ranch or both. I was thinking I had ruined both our lives by bringing you out here. And now I know that some things are worth waiting for. You were worth waiting for, Amelia. You were worth every moment of patience, every gesture that went unacknowledged, every lonely night. Because when you finally did sit down at that table, I knew you were really mine. Not because I had paid for you or because a reverend said some words, but because you chose me. You chose us. Amelia kissed him deeply, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into it. I choose you every day, she whispered against his lips, and I will keep choosing you for the rest of my life. They returned to the ranch the next day to find chaos. Catherine had climbed a tree and refused to come down. James had somehow gotten into the flour and was covered head to toe in white powder. Eleanor had tried to braid the dog's fur, and William was attempting to mediate all of it with limited success. Mrs. Henderson looked frazzled but amused. They are all fine, she assured Amelia and Yates. Just a little excited to see you back. Amelia and Yates looked at each other and burst out laughing. This was their life now, messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Over the next few years, they settled into the rhythms of a mature marriage and a busy household. The children grew and developed their own personalities and interests. William showed an aptitude for ranching and began working alongside Yates more and more. Eleanor discovered a love of horses and became an accomplished rider. James was the family artist, always drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. Catherine was still too young to show clear interests, but she seemed to have inherited Amelia's love of music and would sit for hours listening to her mother play the piano. Amelia did write her book, The Frontier Wife's Companion, and it sold surprisingly well throughout California and beyond. She received letters from women thanking her for the practical advice and the encouragement to pursue their own dreams, even while managing households and families. Yates's orchard flourished, and they began selling apples, pears, and peaches to markets in Sacramento and San Francisco. The diversification proved wise, as it protected them from the ups and downs of the cattle market. In 1895, when Amelia was 35 and Yates was 39, they took their first real family vacation, traveling to San Francisco to see the city and the ocean. The children were amazed by everything, from the cable cars to the ships in the harbor. They spent a week exploring, eating at restaurants and staying at a hotel that the children thought was impossibly grand. On their last evening, Yates and Amelia took a walk along the beach while Mrs. Henderson, who had come along to help with the children, stayed with them at the hotel. They walked barefoot in the sand, watching the sun set over the Pacific. "Can you believe this is our life?" Amelia asked, stopping to look out at the endless expanse of water. "Sometimes I still feel like that frightened girl on the train platform." "You are not her anymore," Yates said. "You grew past her. You became someone stronger, someone who could handle anything life threw at you." "We became stronger," Amelia corrected. "Together." They stood in silence for a while, just being together, listening to the waves crash against the shore. Finally, Yates spoke again. "You think we should have more children?" Amelia looked at him in surprise. "We have 4 already. Are you asking if I want more? I am asking what you want." "We never really planned any of it, we just let it happen. But I want you to be happy, and if that means no more children, or if it means 6 more, I am fine with either." Amelia thought about it seriously. "I think 4 is good," she said finally. "I am 35, and pregnancies get harder as you get older. I love our children more than anything, but I think I am ready to focus on the ones we have and on building our life in other ways." "Then 4 it is," Yates agreed easily. "Though I reserve the right to be disappointed if we do not end up with an unexpected surprise somewhere down the line." Amelia laughed and swatted his arm. "You are impossible. You love it." "I do," she admitted. "I really do." They returned to San Andreas refreshed and full of stories. The children talked about the trip for months, and Amelia could tell it had opened their eyes to the wider world beyond the ranch. She and Yates discussed the importance of making sure their children had opportunities she had not had, that they could choose their own paths rather than being limited by circumstance. As the century drew to a close, the world was changing rapidly. Electricity was coming to more and more places. Automobiles were starting to appear on city streets, and there was talk of airplanes. San Andreas was still a small, quiet town, but even there they could feel the winds of change. In 1899, William turned 17 and announced that he wanted to go to agricultural college in Sacramento to learn modern ranching techniques. Amelia's first instinct was to say no, to keep him close and safe, but Yates supported the idea. He needs to find his own way, Yates told her gently. We cannot keep them children forever. I know, Amelia said, wiping her eyes. I just was not ready for it to happen so fast. None of us ever are. They sent William off to college in the fall with a trunk full of clothes, supplies, and food, and a lecture from both parents about working hard and writing home regularly. Amelia cried for 2 days after he left, mourning the loss of her little boy even as she was proud of the young man he had become. Eleanor, now 15, was already talking about becoming a veterinarian, scandalous for a woman, but increasingly possible in the new century. James, at 12, was torn between art and ranching. Catherine, at 10, was still figuring herself out but showed promise in everything she tried. As the new century dawned on January 1, 1900, Amelia and Yates stood on their porch watching the sun rise. They were both in their 40s now, with gray threading through their hair and lines on their faces earned through hard work and laughter and tears. A new century, Amelia marveled. When I was a child, I never imagined I would live to see it. What do you think the future holds? Yates asked. More change, probably faster than we can imagine, but also the same things that have always mattered. Family, love, home, those do not change no matter what century it is. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Behind them, they could hear the children beginning to wake up, their voices drifting through the windows. In front of them, the sun rose over their land, turning everything golden. I have been thinking, Yates said suddenly. That is dangerous, Amelia teased. He ignored her. When we are old and our children are grown and running this place, what do you want to do? I have not thought that far ahead. Think now, Amelia considered. I want to travel, see some of the places I read about in books. New York, Paris, London, maybe. I want to write more books. I want to volunteer at the school and help other young women who are in the position I was in, scared and alone and needing someone to believe in them. Those all sound good. We will do them. Just like that, just like that. We spent the first half of our lives building this place. The second half should be about enjoying what we built and helping others build their own dreams. When did you get so wise? Amelia asked. I married a smart woman. It rubbed off. They went inside to make breakfast for the family, working side by side in the comfortable synchronization of long practice. When the meal was ready, Yates pulled out Amelia's chair, as he had done for nearly 18 years. She sat down with a smile and a squeeze of his hand. The children clattered in, full of excitement about the new century and the new year. They ate together, talking over each other, laughing, arguing, being a family. Amelia looked around the table at these people she loved more than life itself and felt her heart swell with gratitude. After breakfast, the children went out to do their chores. Yates started to follow them, but Amelia caught his hand. Thank you, she said. For what? For everything. For sending that advertisement, for being patient with me, for pulling out my chair every single night, for giving me this life. Yates pulled her into his arms and held her close. I should be thanking you. You took a chance on a lonely rancher you had never met. You made a house into a home. You gave me children and love and purpose. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Amelia Quinlan. We are the best thing that happened to each other, she said. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding each other, while outside the new century waited with all its promise and possibility. They had started as strangers brought together by necessity, had become partners through adversity, and had evolved into soulmates through patience and choice and enduring love. The years ahead would bring more changes and challenges. William would graduate from college and return to the ranch with new ideas and a wife of his own. Eleanor would indeed become a veterinarian, one of the first women in California to do so. James would move to San Francisco to pursue art, but would return every summer to help with the ranch. Catherine would become a teacher, following in her mother's footsteps. Yates and Amelia would become grandparents, watching their children build families of their own. They would expand the ranch further, make it one of the most successful operations in the region. They would travel together, seeing the world they had only read about. They would grow old together, their love deepening with each passing year. But in that moment, standing in their kitchen on the first day of a new century, they knew only that they had found something rare and precious. A love that had grown from the smallest seed of hope into something strong enough to weather any storm. Every night for the rest of their lives, Yates would pull out Amelia's chair. And every night, Amelia would sit in it, remembering the frightened woman who could not and celebrating the strong woman she had become. It was their ritual, their reminder, their love story told in one simple gesture repeated thousands of times. And if you had asked either of them whether they believed in fate, in meant to be, in love at first sight, they would have said no. Because what they had was better than that. What they had was built, piece by piece, day by day, choice by choice. They had chosen each other, over and over again in 1,000 small ways and a few big ones. The mail-order bride who could not sit down had become the rancher's wife who chose to every single night. And in that choice, repeated endlessly, was all the love anyone could ever need.